My in-laws insisted I change my children's names to match their cultural traditions, saying, "Your names are an insult to our ancestors." My husband agreed, "It's just a name. Why fight it?" I refused and said, "Their names are part of their identity." When they tried to change the names behind my back on official documents, I realized they would never accept me or my culture. I still can't believe I'm writing this. For years, I stayed quiet, thinking if I just kept the peace, things would get better. That if I showed patience, respect, and understanding, they'd eventually accept me. But I was wrong. My in-laws never saw me as part of their family. To them, I was an outsider, an intruder, someone they tolerated because their son loved me. I should have seen the signs earlier. When my husband and I first got together, his family was polite but distant. They never outright insulted me, but their disapproval was always there, hanging in the air like an unspoken rule. They came from a very traditional background, deeply tied to their heritage, while I was from a different culture entirely. To them, my existence in their son's life was an inconvenience, a mistake he'd eventually correct. But we fell in love. We got married. And when I got pregnant, I foolishly thought that would be the turning point. That they would finally see me as family. I was so wrong. "You can't name them that." When we announced our baby's name, the room went silent. His parents exchanged a look, one that sent an immediate chill down my spine. His mother's smile was tight, forced. His father cleared his throat and said, "That's an interesting choice." I asked what they meant. His mother pursed her lips and said, "We assumed you'd honor tradition." That was the start of it. They had a very specific set of names they expected us to use, ones deeply rooted in their culture. Names that had been passed down for generations. They acted like choosing anything else was an insult to their ancestors. I tried to be respectful but firm. "We love this name. It's special to us." My husband was quieter about it. At first, he backed me up. But his family kept pushing. They started visiting more often, calling constantly, bringing up the name issue, like it was some life or death crisis. His father, a man who barely spoke to me otherwise, suddenly had long speeches prepared about the importance of heritage. His mother started crying, yes, actual tears, about how heartbroken their ancestors would be. And then my husband started wavering. "It's just a name," he said one night when we were alone. "Why fight it?" I stared at him, shocked. "It's not just a name. It's our child's identity." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "I just don't want to fight with them anymore." That was the first time I felt the ground shift beneath me. The first time I realized I was fighting this battle alone. The first betrayal we stuck with our name choice, at least, I thought we did. A few weeks after the birth certificate was finalized, I got a call from the hospital. A confused nurse asked me to verify my child's name. I told her. There was a pause. "That's odd," she said. "Because we have a request here for a name change." My heart stopped. I asked who filed it. She hesitated but eventually admitted, "My husband's parents." I saw red. I called my husband immediately. He sounded nervous. "They just submitted a request," he mumbled. "It's not official yet. They thought you'd come around." They thought I'd come around? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. His parents had gone behind my back, tried to legally erase the name I had chosen for my child, and my husband's response was, "Well, they just thought you'd agree eventually?" I went nuclear. I stormed into their house and demanded an explanation. His mother looked at me with a perfectly calm expression and said, "We did what was right. This is bigger than you." No apology. No guilt. Nothing. His father was even worse. He looked me straight in the eye and said, "Your names are an insult to our ancestors." We fixed it. I turned to my husband, waiting for him to defend me. He didn't. He just stood there, silent. That was the moment something inside me broke. I knew, right then and there, that these people would never see me as family. That they saw me as an obstacle, something to work around. And my husband? He was too spineless to stop them. So I stopped being polite. I went back to the hospital, explained the situation, and made sure the request was denied. I locked down every legal document, making it impossible for them to make any changes without my consent. I also filed a formal complaint against them, which meant any future attempts would be flagged as fraud. But that wasn't enough. I knew they would never stop. I needed to make sure they couldn't control my family ever again. And I knew exactly how to do it. Destroying their control, I started digging. I knew my husband was financially tied to his parents. They had always helped him with important decisions, bank accounts, investments, even legal documents. He had been raised to depend on them, to let them handle the serious things while he focused on work. I made it my mission to untangle him from their grasp. Step by step, I moved every account into our names only. I went through every financial tie, every document, every legal agreement they had a hand in. I hired a lawyer, changed wills, updated ownerships. My husband resisted at first, but I played the long game. Every time his parents pulled another stunt, I used it as ammunition. They tried to change our kid's name. Do you really think they wouldn't take control of everything else if they could? He finally started seeing it. And then, the final blow. I found out his parents had set up a legal arrangement that would give them decision-making power if something happened to my husband. Not me. Them. They had put themselves above me in every legal way possible. If my husband got sick, if something happened to him, they would have the final say over everything. Over our home, our finances, even our children. And he had no idea. When I confronted him, he was horrified. He had always trusted them. He had signed whatever they put in front of him, never questioning it. Not anymore. With my lawyer's help, we dismantled everything they had built. Every loophole, every document, every last bit of control they had. It was all erased. When his parents found out, they were livid. How could you do this to us? His mother shrieked. We are family. I looked her dead in the eye and said, you never saw me as family. And for the first time in years, I saw fear in her eyes. Because she realized she had lost. The fallout begins after stripping my in-laws of their control. I expected them to fight back, but even I wasn't prepared for what came next. At first, they tried guilt. My husband's mother called, sobbing into the phone, saying I was ripping the family apart and turning him against his own blood. His father took a more aggressive approach, accusing me of brainwashing their son and poisoning their family's legacy. But I didn't budge. Then, they went after my husband directly. They sent him long, emotional messages, telling him he was abandoning his roots and letting a woman destroy everything they had built for him. They even dragged in extended family members who started reaching out, urging him to make things right. And for a while, I saw the doubt creeping back into his eyes. One night, I caught him staring at his phone, rereading his mother's messages. He looked up at me and said, I think we should at least talk to them. I felt something snap inside me. Talk to them. I repeated. They tried to erase me. They tried to erase our children. They just don't understand, he mumbled. I laughed bitterly. No, they understand perfectly. They just don't care. We argued. Hard. It was the worst fight we'd ever had. I laid everything out, how they had controlled him his entire life, how they saw him as theirs, not his own person, how they had tried to cut me out at every turn. And then I said the words that made him go silent. If you go back to them, they will never stop. And one day, you'll wake up and realize you've lost everything: your wife, your kids, your own decisions. Do you really want to live your life as their puppet? He didn't answer. That was when I knew I was losing him. The secret meeting a week later, I caught him lying to me. I had a feeling something was off. He had been distant, taking calls in another room, avoiding eye contact. Then, one afternoon, I checked our shared calendar and saw an entry that made my blood run cold. Lunch, family. I confronted him immediately. Who are you meeting? He hesitated. Too long. Finally, he admitted it. My parents. I laughed, shaking my head. So after everything they've done, you still run back to them? They're my family, he said. I just want to fix things. I stared at him. You don't fix things with people who don't think you have a right to exist. But he wouldn't listen. He insisted it was just a conversation, just a way to make peace. Against my better judgment, I let him go. And that was my mistake. The betrayal I never expected. He came home late. Too late. When he walked in, I could tell immediately something was wrong. He wouldn't look at me. His hands were clenched into fists. His jaw was tight. What did they say? I asked. Silence. I stepped closer. What did they say? Then he looked up, and the words that came out of his mouth destroyed me. They were right. I actually felt my breath catch. About what? He swallowed hard. About the kids. About the names. It took me a moment to process. My heart started pounding. You agree with them? He didn't answer. But he didn't deny it either. I took a step back, shaking my head. After everything they did. Going behind my back, trying to change legal documents, cutting me out of every decision, you still think they're right. He ran a hand through his hair. I don't know. He exhaled sharply. I don't want to lose my family. I felt my stomach drop. So what am I? Just someone you tolerate? A placeholder until they accept me? He flinched. It's not like that. Then what is it like? My voice was shaking now. Because from where I'm standing, you just told me that my culture, my choices, our children's identity mean nothing to you. His silence was the answer. I turned around and walked away. I didn't sleep that night. I just lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling something inside me crack. The man I had fought for, the man I had built a life with, wasn't really mine. He had never been mine. He had always been theirs. And that's when I made my decision. I wasn't going to fight for him anymore. I was going to fight against him. And I was going to win. The breaking point, I didn't leave right away. I wanted to, but something inside me told me to wait. To see just how far he would go. The next few days were tense. My husband barely spoke to me, and when he did, it was short, clipped answers. I could tell he was avoiding conflict, hoping things would just settle. Then, one night, I found something that shattered any hope I had left. I was going through the mail when I saw an official-looking envelope addressed to my husband. It was from a legal office I didn't recognize. I opened it, and there it was. A petition to legally change our children's names. He had already signed it. I sat down, my hands shaking as I read through the paperwork. My in-laws' names were listed as petitioners. They were trying again, but this time, with my husband's full cooperation. They had gone behind my back again, and he had let them. I heard his car pull into the driveway. I placed the papers on the kitchen table and waited. When he walked in, I didn't say a word. I just slid the document toward him and watched his face drain of color. "You were going to tell me when?" I asked, my voice eerily calm. He opened his mouth, then closed it. I stood up. "You really thought you could do this without me finding out?" "It's not what you think," he said quickly. I laughed, a hollow sound. "Oh, really? Because it looks like you and your parents just tried to erase my kids' names again." He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. I thought maybe if we changed them now, before they were older, they wouldn't even remember." I slammed my hand on the table. "You thought you could just wipe away their identity and replace it with whatever your parents wanted? They're just names," he shot back. "Why does this have to be such a big deal?" I felt my stomach twist. "You really don't get it, do you?" He shook his head, exasperated. "No, I don't. I don't get why you're so obsessed with this. I don't get why you have to fight everything they say. They're my parents, and they only want what's best for us." I felt my heart harden. "No, they only want what's best for them." He exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples. I don't want to keep fighting." I looked at him long and hard. "You don't want to fight because you've already chosen a side." And for the first time, he didn't deny it. That was all I needed to know. The twist I didn't see coming. I went quiet after that. Too quiet. And he noticed. He started hovering, watching me out of the corner of his eye like he was afraid of what I'd do next. But I didn't scream. I didn't argue. I just let him think he'd won. But I was planning. And then, just when I thought I had him figured out, he threw me another betrayal. A few days later, I got an email notification from our shared bank account. A large withdrawal. A very large withdrawal. I checked the details. My husband had taken money from our joint savings, money I had earned, money meant for our children, and transferred it to a new account. An account with his mother's name attached to it. I felt like I was going to be sick. I called the bank immediately, trying to reverse the transaction, but I was too late. The money was gone. I confronted him as soon as he got home. "What the hell did you do?" I hissed, shoving my phone in his face. He didn't even look guilty. "I moved it somewhere safe." "Safe?" I repeated, my voice rising. "Safe from who?" He exhaled, annoyed. "Look, my parents just think we need to handle finances differently. They know what they're doing, and I trust them." I stared at him, disbelief crashing over me like a wave. "This isn't just about money," I whispered. "This is about control. They're pulling your strings, and you're letting them." He crossed his arms. "They've always helped me. They know what's best." My blood ran cold. They know what's best. I had lost him. Completely. And that's when I realized, this wasn't just about the kids' names anymore. This was about me. They weren't just trying to erase my children's names. They were trying to erase me. And I wasn't going to let them. The final betrayal after discovering the bank transfer, something in me changed. The realization that my husband wasn't just weak, but actively choosing his parents over me, was a slap in the face. But I wasn't going to lash out blindly. I was going to end this. For the next week, I played the role of the obedient wife. I stopped arguing. I let him think I was giving up. I knew if I confronted him too soon, he'd just run back to his parents for damage control. Instead, I planned. I gathered evidence. I went through every financial record, printed out copies of bank statements, and documented every withdrawal. I found messages between him and his parents discussing how to secure the money so I wouldn't waste it. Then I looked into the legal side of things. I contacted a lawyer. I found out exactly what my rights were. And then I made my move. The public exposure, the opportunity came sooner than I expected. His parents invited us to a big family dinner, one of those suffocating, over-the-top gatherings where they showed off how perfect their family was. Normally, I would have refused, but this time I smiled and said, of course. Because I had a plan. The dinner was held at a fancy restaurant. His parents sat at the head of the long table, lording over everyone. The entire extended family was there, including a few distant relatives who barely knew us. They toasted to family unity and honoring traditions. That was when I struck. I stood up, holding up my glass as if I was about to toast. The room quieted. And then I turned to my husband and said, loud enough for the whole table to hear. Tell everyone how you and your parents tried to steal our children's names behind my back. Silence. Every head turned toward me. His mother's fake smile twitched. His father narrowed his eyes. My husband stiffened. What are you talking about? His mother said, a forced laugh in her voice. I pulled out the legal documents I had brought with me. These are the 2 petitions you filed to change my kids' names without my consent. I tossed them onto the table. And this, I threw down the bank records, is proof that my husband stole money from our joint account and transferred it to you. Gasps echoed around the table. My husband went pale. His mother reached for the papers, but I snatched them away. Don't bother. I've already sent copies to my lawyer. His father slammed a hand on the table. This is a family matter. You're making a scene. I let out a sharp laugh. A scene? You mean like how you secretly tried to take away my legal rights as their mother? I turned to my husband. You told me you wanted peace, but you didn't want peace. You wanted control. You wanted me to break. He started, but I cut him off. You were just what? Lying? Stealing? Betraying your wife and kids to keep your parents happy. People were whispering now. His mother looked around, panicked. Let's discuss this privately, she hissed. No, I said coldly. You didn't do this privately. You involved the courts, the banks, and every legal system you could manipulate. So we're doing this here. I turned back to my husband. Tell them. Tell everyone what you did. He swallowed hard. I was just, tell them. His hands trembled on the table. He glanced at his parents, then at me, and for the first time, I saw it, fear. Not of me. Of what he had become. Then, finally, he whispered, I just wanted them to be happy. His mother gasped like he had just stabbed her. We did this for you, she cried. She's turned you against us. But for the first time, he didn't rush to defend them. He just sat there, staring at his hands, looking defeated. I left that night. I took the kids, packed my bags, and walked out. He didn't even try to stop me. A week later, I filed for divorce. His parents tried to fight me for custody, but the judge laughed them out of the courtroom. I had proof of their manipulation, their fraud, and their attempted erasure of my children's legal identities. My husband tried to apologize. He called, sent messages, even showed up at my new place once, begging to talk. But I was done listening. You made your choice, I told him. Now live with it. I got full custody. His visitation was limited, supervised, because I proved in court that he had willingly participated in trying to remove my parental rights. And his parents? They lost everything. Their perfect son had fallen from grace. Their family name, so important to them, was now stained with scandal. The extended family they had tried so hard to impress started whispering about them behind their backs. Their influence? Gone. And their legacy? Not only did I keep my children's names, I gave them my last name.